What is up, plant people? Hey, today is Tuesday, July 6th, 2021, and we're back with another episode of the Planthropology Podcast, the show where we dive into the lives, careers, and overall very coolness of some of the best plant people out there. I'm Vikram Baliga, your host, and as always, y'all, I'm so thrilled to be with you today. How's it going? You having a good beginning to your July? I was going to say, did you have a good July 4th? But, for a lot of our international listeners, it doesn't mean anything. So if you are a U.S. listener, one of them, they're Americans, I hope you didn't blow any fingers off. I hope you had a safe and fun July 4th and that your animals are not too traumatized. If you are one of my international friends, I hope you had a great Sunday and a great weekend and that you're doing okay. Friday was my birthday. I turned 34 years ancient. My bones were like, "You're old." That's what bones sound like. I'm sorry for all those noises I assaulted your ear holes with. But yeah, I turned 34. And if you want to get me a late birthday gift, I am a size 5-star in rating and reviews. Yep. Hey, so I've got a good one for you today. I was just a guest on the What Are You Going to Do with That podcast, which is a show about graduate school and all of that. And I got to talk about my journey. And the host, Dannis Reches, decided that we decided we would do a cool episode swap. And I got to talk with Danni, and it was funny because she was like, "I'm not a plant person," and she actually kind of is indirectly a little bit. More on that soon. I don't want to ruin the surprise, but Danni is a PhD student and a research fellow at the University of Haifa, as well as the University of Leipzig in Germany. And so she is brilliant, absolutely brilliant and personable, and tells such an interesting story on everything from graduate school to human migration and the way that plays into some of our sociopolitical issues and agriculture and everything else. And I am so excited for y'all to hear this episode. It's great. It's so good. Before we get into that, I forgot to, as I usually do, put in a spot for a mid-roll. I know I'm not an adult. I don't write things down. So I'm going to talk to you about the cool stuff now that I would normally do in a mid-roll. Hey, you should go follow Planthropology on social media. Search for Planthropology. It's anthropology with a PL slapped right on the front. And look for the bristlecone pine, and that'll be me. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and on the TikTok as the Plant Prof, at the Plant Prof. If you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/planthropology. I think that would be great, but you don't have to. You know what? It's fine. You don't have to support the show that way. I would just be happy for you to listen and to tell your friends about Planthropology. The show's been growing a lot lately. I don't know where you people are coming from, but I'm very happy about it. So if you want to support the show more, the best thing you can do is retweet, tell friends about the show, share things on Facebook about it, and just listen and enjoy it. I hope you do. Also, as always, if you leave a rating and review on either Podchaser or Apple or wherever, and send me a screenshot with your address, I will send you a cool sticker pack. And I'm almost through writing this round's list of thank you notes that go with it. I handwrite a note with each one, and they will hopefully go out this week. If not, it'll be next week. But I had quite a few of them, and so does anyone write with a pen anymore? I don't know. I do. And so those will go out soon. So if you want to get in on the next batch, drop a rating and review, send me your address, and I will send you some cool stickers. But that's all. So I hope you are ready for some really interesting informations that's sometimes heavy, often fun, and really, really interesting. So get yourselves ready for today's episode of Planthropology with my new friend and host of the What Are You Going to Do With That podcast, Dannis Reches. All right. Well, we are back with another episode of Planthropology, and I've got something a little bit different for you today. I'm here with Dannis Reches, who is a joint PhD student and a fellow, and I'm going to try to say all these words right, at the University of Haifa, and also at the University of Leipzig.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. In Germany. She is at the Center for German and European Research. She's doing migration studies, and she has such in my opinion, a very, very interesting background. And normally we talk about plants here, but we also talk a lot about academia and different life experiences and how we get to where we get to. And I got to be a guest on Danny's podcast. What are you going to do with that? Actually, just last
Hmm.
week. And so I'm excited to have her on today. So, Danny, how are you doing?
I'm great, and I'm so glad to be on your podcast this time after having our conversation for my podcast. So let's see where it goes.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited, and like I said, we normally talk about plants, and I'm really excited about talking about history too, because an important part of this podcast is not just the plants itself, but our human connections to the world around us, to the natural environment, to different societies and things like that. That's the anthropology part of planthropology a little bit.
Hmm.
And when I think about human migrations and the way that we move, a lot of that's driven by the environment and by that kind of thing. But I'm excited, so I'm gonna try not to ramble too much. But why don't we start off and just introduce yourself a little bit more? Tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
So me and my research are a bit from all over the place, as you've already mentioned. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, but I have a Dutch mother and an Israeli father. So I was born with two passports. And as soon as I finished high school, I went to Israel to get to know my roots a little bit more, learn the language, see my family, things like that. So since I'm grown up, I've been living half here and half there in the Netherlands and in Israel. And I've been studying a BA in Middle Eastern Studies in the Netherlands. That's what interested me back then. And then I was in Israel and I started studying international relations, so a bit broader and more international. And then somehow I ended up doing a PhD at the same University of Haifa in Israel on migration studies. So it's a little bit of everything, but I'm very excited to be doing what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome. And gosh, there's so much there, and I think that's like you really have a very diverse background. And what got you interested in those things? Was it uh, partially just having like two passports and living in different parts of the world and having this like wide experience?
It might be, yeah. I do tell people usually that I am a fifth generation migrant myself. And whereas in America, a lot of people think that means you're the fifth person living in America.
Hmm.
I actually mean it's the fifth person in a straight line in my family who has moved to a different country than where they were born in.
Wow.
So that means that my dad and my grandfather and my great grandfather, but also on both sides, also on the mother side, lived in a different country than they were born in. So that has to do, of course, with a lot of history. Like you said, my family background is Jewish, so we had the world wars going on and people moving around a lot. But my dad moved by choice because of my mom. They met in
Mhm.
Israel. She was blonde, and he fell in love. And they went to the Netherlands, and that's where I was born. And then I did a similar thing. I fell in love with my now husband. We recently got married. So
Congratulations.
thank you. He's Israeli, and that's also one of the reasons that I stuck around here, and I'm very glad to be doing my research in Israel right now.
That's pretty cool. And you mentioned before we started recording that you are a joint PhD student, and I don't know that that's something that is super common here in the U.S. I mean, I know it is done, but what does that mean? What does that look like?
So that's where you're crazy enough at the beginning of your PhD because you're not sure what you're doing yet. You're like, oh, can I get 2 degrees from 2 different universities? Why not? And then they try to make you believe that you can do it within the same amount of time, but that's probably not gonna happen, at least not for me. But yeah, I started doing my PhD at my hometown university in Israel in Haifa. And from there, they are very connected because it's the European Studies Center, right, with European universities. and professors that work there in all kinds of departments. So my supervisor was really close to another professor in Europe in political science, and my supervisor here is a historian, even though I come from political science. So he's like, maybe if we can connect with a second supervisor that is closer to your field, then it would be easier for him, obviously, but also for me and my work. And then we can connect to another university. So it would benefit our center, also me and the research. So it seemed like a win-win, and I did receive a scholarship for it. It was worth it, I think.
That's awesome. That gives you such a vast, again, range of experience. And we talk a lot, I think, in academia about, you hear, well, at least I have heard a lot. Oh, you shouldn't get multiple degrees from the same place, blah blah blah, which I apparently didn't care, and I just did anyway. But it's interesting that you're like in two places for at the same time, and I think that's really cool. I think diversity is always good. However you kind of cut that in experience and education and in people, in ecology. So that's really cool to me.
Definitely, it's one of the joys for me that I get to travel around, live in different places. I have traveled quite a lot, also together with my partner. We spent a few months traveling around in Asia. We spent 6 months traveling and working in Australia at different times. And unfortunately, because of Corona, it doesn't seem like we can do another trip anytime soon. But it's definitely on the long-term plan, because we still need to do that honeymoon, right?
Yeah.
And then the people that you meet and the stories that you hear are so enriching. It's really great.
Oh, for sure. And, and that's it. Yeah. I would love to travel more than I've been able to. And it's funny because I think in the US sometimes get kind of, I don't want to say stuck. It's maybe not the right word, but we're maybe not in general as well traveled as those in some other parts of the world. It's interesting hearing you talk. I am a first generation American, probably in immigrant or whatever. It probably in either way that you look at it. My family moved to the U.S. from India in the 70s. And so my mom was probably 12, 13 or something when they moved here. And
young.
Yeah, pretty young. My uncle was 2. And so they lived most of their life here in the U.S. But my grandparents were in the medical profession. My granddad was a doctor, and he got his medical license in India, and then moved the family to the U.S. and had practiced here for 30 years. And but yeah, no, it's interesting hearing those experiences, because I've been back to India. I say back; it's not back for me, but
right.
3 times, I guess. And in my mind, that's this big like undertaking to get there, because I'm an American and we don't travel a lot. But then it's cool to hear the experiences of folks internationally that you're like, oh yeah, I was in all these places and I saw 4 countries last weekend and all of that. It's just it's kind of cool to think about. And I think it's seeing the world is a big goal of mine. I would love to see a lot more places than I have.
Whereabout in India have you been?
So mostly kind of south central, southwest. My mom and I guess my dad too were from the Mysore region of India. My grandparents lived in Mumbai for quite a while. So the first time that I was there, I was or Bombay for those that are maybe uninitiated. And so the first time I went when I was a kid, we went to Mumbai. I spent most of the time there. Later, and this is on my dad's side. Later on, they moved to Bangalore, which is more in the center of the country, more southern central. And so we spent some time there. We've been to a place called Goa, which was a Portuguese colony.
Oh, I've heard of Goa.
And it's beautiful. One of the most beautiful places I've ever been.
A lot of beach.
A lot of beach, a lot of old Catholic churches and stuff too, which was I forget that Europeans were in India for 400 years, and so there's a lot of Portuguese, definitely English influence there, British influence. And so it was interesting for me. It was definitely a eye-opening experience for me, getting to go back and learn more about some of my roots.
So you and your family sound very adventurous because that's what I think it is. I think that a lot of migrants, people who chose to migrate, right? That's very different from refugees
Sure.
forced to, didn't have a choice, which is also part of the research I'm doing. So people who chose in a way to migrate for whatever reason, for love or for work or other things, I think they're very adventurous. It's a big leap to go to, especially in your case, the other side of the world, right? Or a whole different place, and try and make it there. But they also become very creative, right? They have to find their way in this new place. They have to learn a new language. Everything is different. Of course, also the plants, which is what you would be talking
Sure.
about
Yeah.
more.
And so that actually leads me into my next question. So it was funny when we were talking about this, about setting up these interviews. You were like, well, I'm not really a plant person. So I was curious to hear, do you have any experience working with plants? I mean, you're from the Netherlands, so I would think that there's at least some connection there.
Well, that's the thing. In one way, I would say no, I don't have a lot of experience with plants. And part of the reason is because I am moving around a lot. I
Hmm.
also now live in student dorms that's just on a 1 year contract, right? So I don't have any pets. I don't commit to any plants because it doesn't fit in my suitcase, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, here in Israel, my family is from a kibbutz. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but
Hmm.
it's really an agricultural community. And my uncle is the manager of the avocado fields there. So that's a
Oh,
big
cool.
part of our family and our history. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And when I think of the Netherlands, I think of flowers, and I think of
Right.
um, you know, I, I mentioned when we spoke for your podcast that I'm from a very flat, dry part of the world, and it's interesting studying plants here because we have grass, we have some wildflowers, and that's kind of it, natively anyway. So was that ever part of your life growing up, the plant festivals and those kinds of things?
Interesting. Actually, when my dad came to the Netherlands the first time, he didn't even have a high school degree.
Wow.
Like in the Netherlands, where you need a degree for everything to do anything, he started working at the flower auction in the Netherlands, which is this huge deal because the Netherlands is a big hub for import and export throughout all of Europe.
Hmm.
So the flowers come in there to be sold and then transported immediately. So he had a big thing with flowers. And still, I think he's one of the only people, or maybe it's a generational thing, I don't know, who still gives flowers a lot to family or friends for birthdays or occasions. But I am from a part in the Netherlands that's not really known for its tulips. That's
Oh,
really a
okay.
different province. So I haven't actually had that experience of cycling past it on my way to school or something like that.
Okay. No, that's interesting though, and you mentioned like giving flowers, and this is going to be sort of a tangent, but not many people do that anymore. That really is interesting.
Right?
That's not as
That's a
much of a
bit old
thing.
fashioned, I feel right now. Yeah.
And we have actually here at the greenhouse that I run, we have a bunch of classrooms, we teach a bunch of labs, we see like 500 students a week. It's pretty active, but one of our courses is floral design. And
Mm.
one of our instructors here actually has written textbooks on floral design. He's like the guy, right? He knows he's the floral design guy. Um, and it's interesting seeing students come to take that class and finding out that there is still a market for it. There's still a career for it, and it's really fun watching them learn to like make arrangements and appreciate the different plant materials and all of that. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
cool.
Having just had a wedding, and never having thought about flowers before, I understand that there is a huge market in this, and that people who know how to style flowers, like you say, they make good money.
They
You
do.
know,
They do.
yeah.
And it's interesting because that for me, and it was one of the things that drew me to landscaping, is it's an interesting mix of like art and science. And you get to, because you have to know how the flowers work, how they hold up in different conditions and all that. But it's also art. It's design. It's kind of interesting. But this
Yeah.
isn't about me. This is about you. Um, so I'm interested to hear a little bit more about the research you're doing now, and some of the work you're doing. Could you tell us just a little bit more about your PhD program?
Yeah, sure. I hope I can be short about it. I usually ramble on at some point,
Oh,
so
it's
you might
fine.
have to stop me.
No, it's fine.
Cool. So I'm looking a lot into discourses. So, what are the perceptions of people in Germany and the Netherlands? Those are my case study countries. How do they perceive immigrants? And I'm looking particularly at immigrants who come from the Middle East and North Africa. So, these are people that have been coming in larger numbers to Northern Europe, especially in the 60s, because they were invited to come as what they called guest workers, which already means that they were going to be there as a guest and then at some point also leave again.
Huh.
Right. But then actually, what happened is that they didn't leave because they kept getting work contracts. They were able to stay longer. At some point, they started flying in their families, and their children even decided to, for example, marry someone in Turkey and then also bring them back to the Netherlands. And that went on well into the 80s and the 90s. Then in the 90s and 2000s, we had a lot of refugees coming from Northern Africa, also from Syria nowadays in the last 10 years, of course, but also from Turkey. So here we have people coming in from the Middle East, being a presence for quite long and in a quite large amount too in these countries. But how have people perceive these groups? Have these things always been the same since the 60s? Were they more positive in the beginning because they were guests and it was fun? Or did they already back then maybe speak about them in a way that's not so nice?
Interesting.
So there's a lot of discourse analysis that I'm doing. I'm looking into newspapers, particularly in print. So I've been going to a lot of archives in Germany and in the Netherlands to collect all these newspapers. I've really been sitting in front of these huge machines with film that I had to go over. So it really felt like a detective when I was doing that, but I got tired of it pretty soon. And thanks to COVID, maybe a lot of it actually went online. So I was able to collect it from home behind my computer. And now I'm still going over that data to really see what has actually been said. And I'm starting to see results. Some things that I obviously expected already based on the literature review I've done, but some things also quite interesting. So I like where it's going.
That's really exciting. And I know how it is when you're in the process of kind of parsing some of these things out, that it's hard to say too much about, where that is. But I'm interested in the future as you kind of get farther down the road to hear, a little bit more about some of the things you found. And it's interesting hearing you talking about this because I think immigration worldwide is a major area of discussion, right? People move, and there's so much political and social and just everything else kind of wrapped into that.
Right, because a lot of the things that I see in these newspapers and the way that they write about certain foreigners and immigrants is not even true. And I know that because that happened in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And there's scientific research done about that and surveys to check what was actually the case. And we know that it was just really like fake news, literally, in the 60s in the newspaper. Back then, we just didn't call it that way yet.
Right.
And everything was very political right from the start. Politicians always had something to say about it. In a way, they've always been in this situation, the gatekeepers of the nation, right? The politicians decide who is part of the nation and who is not. So it's always been political. And this is what I find so interesting. And that's why, as coming from political science, I think migration fits in really well. And that it also really is a field that has, unfortunately, in a way, an important future.
Yeah. Well, man, that is, and that kind of has my brain spinning a little bit. I like the way you say that. I say I like it. It's an interesting way to say that they are the gatekeepers of the nation.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really thought of it in those terms, but you're absolutely right. That's fascinating. My immigration is a big, well, again, it's a big deal everywhere, but in the world of agriculture, in the U.S. right now, probably internationally as well, but I can't speak to that as well. That is something that we hear constantly. Constantly, we talk about migrant workers and folks that are coming to work in agricultural production settings and all of that. And I have lots of friends that are agriculturists that own farms that employ lots of migrant workers. And the complexity of the like socio-political factors that drive the ability of these folks to come work and these folks to and it's on both sides, right? Like they want to come work, and the farmers and the people that are running these operations need them. They need them. They're an integral part of our food systems, of the way that we live our lives. But then it gets picked up by one political party or the other, and it just becomes this whole thing.
I know. Did you know that here in Israel, a lot of agricultural labor workers from Thailand?
I didn't know that.
And my uncle, who's working with the avocado here, has a few Thai workers, and his work has paid him to take some Thai classes. So he would be, better in communicating with them about all kinds of small things. And now with Corona, it's been a huge issue because they haven't been able to come back after, for example, visiting family or to extend their visa anymore. So there's been a huge lack of these workers. So it's a really interesting phenomenon. Yeah.
Wow. And no, I didn't realize that. That's really fascinating. Most of our migrant workers here are from Mexico. And, because a lot of our ag production is in the southern US along the border with Mexico and Texas, throughout parts of New Mexico, Arizona, into California. And, I don't think it's any secret that is a big political issue right now, the border, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, we've seen over the past year, especially through COVID, how important these workers are, these people are to our very way of life here in this country. I'm sure that's true there too. But there were fields in California that the crops were planted, and not just in California, but the crops were planted, the vegetables grew, and they rotted in the field because the borders closed and people weren't able to come harvest it. And that's devastating to hear because of the amount of food insecurity that is present worldwide.
Yeah, I hope that some people will remember that also after this crisis is over. Because a story that we hear a lot all over the world by politicians is that these foreign workers are coming to steal our jobs, but especially in Europe, and I suppose also with you.
Oh, very much.
Actually, no people who are able to do it because simply they don't want to. They're doing other things, right? Like we're academics.
Yeah,
we're not in the field, and there's also not enough sometimes people who could be working in the fields to take everything out. So they're really a necessity too for our economies. And if we would start looking at them that way, and we would also treat them that way, I think a lot of people would be better off.
I think so too. And it's a I don't know if you've probably seen this, or I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. But it seems to me that dealing with some of these issues, one of the first things is finding common ground. We have to find a way to like you were saying, recognize that immigrants and just not just everyone, like we're all integral in each other's lives in some way, and we all are important to each other. And unfortunately, some of the talking or screaming heads sometimes that we have to listen to want to drive divisions into that, right? And make it us versus them when we're really kind of all part of a team. Have you seen that efforts to find those common grounds throughout history have led to benefits? I mean, is that something that has even really been done?
Wow, that's a really complicated question.
Sorry.
That's all right. I mean, no, this is one of the most important questions in migration studies, and everyone has very different ideas about it. I don't think I can actually give you an example of a success story, which is the sad thing. Wait, are you still with me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay, you froze for a moment.
Oh, okay.
But you can still hear me.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It says now my internet connection is unstable. So let me know if you lose me.
Okay.
I'll tell my partner in the meantime that he should stop watching Netflix. So I was saying that, there's unfortunately not really a success story yet. And I think one of the problems is in finding a solution to this issue is that it's not so much about the people. It's much more on a higher level of those politicians. And it's for a reason that I also said that these people are the ones who decide what the nation actually is, who is a part of it, and who is not a part of it. Wow. Right? So it has to do a lot with identity and with nationalism. And that is a very difficult thing to change. And for politicians, it's the only way for them to survive. If they want to stay a politician in a high position, they need to give their constituency the idea that they are the ones who are protecting them. And that's why it's worth it to vote for them. And that's why populist actors are very powerful in that way and very successful, because they found out how it works and what people want to know and how to make people a little bit scared of others, and that they are the savior of these people who are scared of the other.
Wow.
So it goes very deep in a way.
Yeah.
And that's a very difficult issue to solve. So we might not only look into migration and migration studies and that literature for solution, but also really in political science research that's being done about populism at the moment.
Wow, that's really fascinating. That gives me a lot to think about. That'll play around in my head for a while.
I hope it makes sense.
Yeah. Oh no, it does. It absolutely does. Yeah. So I want to change gears just a little bit. I mean, this has been a really fascinating conversation, but I don't want to miss out on the podcast that you do. I think that that's really fascinating, really interesting. And again,
yes,
I know that it maybe seems like a hard left turn from what we've been talking about, but I don't think so, because I think that what y'all do on your podcast is, in a lot of ways, feature a lot of different voices in different fields and in different studies and in different life experiences. And that is so important to finding that common ground that we've been talking about and starting to address some of these issues, even I think we've been talking about. So can you tell us a little bit about your podcast? What are you going to do with that?
Yes. And don't forget that it's also interesting and important, but it's mostly a lot of fun, right?
It is
That's
fun.
why I'm hosting that podcast, because I enjoy doing that a lot. So it wasn't actually my idea. 2 years ago, right before the pandemic hit, someone that I study with in the University of Haifa, but not from my study center, from another study center that's more into law. It's called the Minerva Center for the Rule of Law Under Extreme Conditions. And his name is Ido Rosenstein. So he is working there. He's also doing his PhD there at the moment. He's supposed to be done soon, so fingers crossed. Then he'll be Dr. Ido. He came up with this idea because he's been working with a lot of other PhD students, and he's been working in this center with a lot of ECRs too. Then he's like, okay, so I'm kind of doing the PhD alone because I'm not doing any classes or courses where I meet peers. And I'm struggling with a lot of things, and sometimes I really want to celebrate something, but I can't. I'm all by myself going through this.
Yeah.
So he was thinking there must be a lot of other people with similar stories who are or maybe interested in listening to what other people experience. And he was really into listening to podcasts himself at the time. So he thought, why not ask the center that I'm already working for if they would be cool with doing a podcast on their name, right? To have a little bit more base and ground, and some listeners to start with as well. And then he was totally into doing that, and producing that, and editing it, and thinking a little bit about the music. We already had the equipment, even for video, but also the microphones and all these things, because we used that already to record presentations of the ECRs in the center.
Okay.
So we had all the equipment, right? All he needed was someone who likes to talk a lot and is comfortable enough with doing that in English, because here, obviously, most people are Hebrew or Arabic native speakers.
Right.
So I was crazy enough, again, at the beginning of my PhD, not knowing what I was getting into, to volunteer, which was a lot of fun. And the volunteering has also actually turned into a little bit more of a job. I am getting a little bit of a contribution for it. So that's
awesome.
Really great as well. And it's also a lot of appreciation. So I like that. Yeah, and it's been going well. So I started talking to guests who are doing their PhD or just recently finished doing their PhD. And when they talk about their academic stories, I wanted to know, and Ido also, we both wanted to know what their struggles were, what their successes were. And we pretty quickly found out that everyone has a very unique story, like very unique research, different fields, different universities, different backgrounds, different countries, different languages, all of these things. But there's a lot of similar themes coming back all the time. We're always talking about the publications. We talked about earlier, which will come up in our episode of our podcast as well, about tenure track, about things in the system that don't really seem to be right. So we talk a lot about a lot of these things, which is very difficult for a PhD student, for example, also to speak about their supervisor when they're still doing their PhDs,
Yeah.
right? If
Yeah.
you're struggling with that. But I think it's been very important. And I've been recognizing a lot in other people's stories. And I've also been learning a lot from it. So that's been a lot of fun, a really great learning experience, um, and a great cooperation with Ido as well.
And it's a great show, and I really enjoy listening to it. And I again, we talked about this a little bit, but part of being, I think, in the field that we are in academia and all of that is just getting to learn new things. Like that's what keeps me excited about it, is I get to learn new things. And you have such a wide variety of people on your
Yes.
show that you get to learn a lot of cool new stuff.
Yeah, and things that I never even knew were out there. For example, not only the systems of when or how you get to do a PhD in Europe and in Israel and in Australia and in the US work very differently. But the same goes for different kinds of fields. Like I had never realized that in biology they work in labs and they have to apply for a lab instead of just thinking of a research topic that they want to look into, which is very different from the way I'm doing my PhD.
Right.
So I've been speaking to someone who's been doing molecular biology and looking into broccoli. We've been speaking to a guy who calls himself also the banana man, who's doing research about banana diseases.
Yeah.
And it's really all kinds of things. We had people from law, people from psychology, social work, really anything you can imagine.
That's awesome. And so how and I always wonder, because I think about this about my show, and it's a hard question to answer, and I don't know if you have a good answer for it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have a feel for what your listener base is like? Do you think it's just academics? Do you think it's some people outside of academia that are just curious? It's hard to know, and I wonder about this a lot for my show too. So I was just curious what you thought, or if you had any insight.
Yeah, it's hard to know. And I think Ido has a bit more insight than me because he's the producer and he's also behind our social media accounts and wherever you can listen to our podcasts. So he knows a bit more about numbers, for example. And he does share it with me, especially if it's good numbers. Then he wants me to know. Sometimes also when they're less good numbers.
Right, sure.
But yeah, I like to think that it's mostly people who are going through the same things themselves, who are ECRs, who are doing a PhD, especially in the beginning. I feel also from people that I've had some feedback from, because they're really still searching for how am I going to do this? Can someone tell me how this is going to be? And also a lot of people, and I've gotten a lot of personal messages also on social media to me directly, not even the podcast, with people asking like, okay, so I'm thinking about doing a PhD. Should I do it or not? And that's a very difficult question to ask someone who's struggling with their own PhD at
Right.
times. So I always try to give a most neutral advice and then also really say, like, why don't you just listen to the podcast, listen to the stories of different people and see if you can relate to any of them and then just do what you feel is right for you. In the end, you really have to listen to yourself, to how you feel about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that if you're out there listening and you're in graduate school, whether at the master's or PhD level, even though it is different, there are some differences there for sure. In terms of, I think, responsibility and the amount of guidance you get and all of this kind of stuff. But I think that if you are in academia, honestly, on either side of your PhD, whether you're a student or whether you're a faculty member who is advising and is working with PhD students, I think this is a great show to listen to. Your show is a great show to listen to because you get a lot of insight into the both the successes and the struggles. And I think on this side of the field, as we're building our careers as faculty members, as PhDs, it's important to go back and hear those stories of, gosh, I really struggled with this, or I really struggled with that. So we can try to help our students through that so that we can be better mentors and better advisors. So I think anyone that is even related to academia should be listening to the show. But also, even if you're not, and you just like some insight into the stuff that we do, I think it would be pretty fascinating to hear just some of that from an outside perspective too.
And if I may add something extra that we've been mostly focusing on, especially in this second season that we're almost wrapping up right now, is that we're focusing very much too on the diversity of our guests. We don't want to present academia, which is actually the way it is mostly at the moment, which is still white and older and male, if I may say. Not so politically correct. So we are trying to have guests really from all over. So we have a lot of women guests on our podcast, and there are a lot of female PhD students. Even in a way disproportionately more. So hopefully a lot of professors will come out of that in the future too, female professors. But we also have people from different backgrounds. Like here in Israel, I've been speaking to Jewish Israelis, obviously. Also been speaking with Arabs and Palestinians from different religions. We've had people who are from the Christian minority and even from the Druze minority, which is something you might have never heard about, but it's definitely worth listening to. And for those women, it's sometimes even more difficult to break a glass ceiling through their communities. So we have some really powerful stories in there. We also have people from the LGBTQ plus community, which especially in this Pride Month is very important. We've had an episode about microaggression in academia, where we also spoke with someone who's been very active in the Black Lives Matter movement, and also speaks about being Black or of color in academia and how people look at you if that's what you do, and how difficult that is, and how to respond to microaggression. So we've had some very interesting people, very strong people, with a lot of tips and tricks to get through it, because we really believe that it's a very difficult thing to do a PhD, but if you're only thinking about it, you're probably good to go and you can power through. So good to listen to some tips and tricks.
Yeah, well, that actually leads me into the kind of we'll start wrapping up here, but the last question one question I like to ask every guest, and it's that was a perfect segue into this, is if you had a piece of advice for our listeners, and it can be about anything, literally anything, what would that be? What would you like someone to take home with them after listening to this episode?
Oh man, I'm probably going to think of something way better right before I fall asleep tonight. But what I'm thinking about right now, which is a follow-up of what we were just saying, is really to listen to how you feel, how it's going. A lot of people start doing a PhD and then they find out that it's not working out. And that could be for a lot of different reasons. It could be that it's just not for you. It might be something very different than you thought it was going to be. You might be struggling financially because that was also not how you thought it was going to be. Or it might be too much of a lonely experience for you. There could be a lot of reasons. There could be even reasons that you think aren't good enough to quit. But sometimes it really is okay to quit. I know a lot of people who are try to keep soldiering on through struggles, and sometimes that is what you have to go through, and it's not easy. So there will be rough patches and you'll get through them. But you also have to really feel when it's too much, and then it's not worth it to suffer and get, really with mental health issues at the end. So it's important to keep talking with friends, with family, have a support system, never let go of that, no matter how busy you are. To keep checking in with yourself, like, is this still how I want to keep doing it? It's also okay to take breaks. Breaks are very important. So listen to yourself, listen to your support, and then you'll figure out if you should be going on or not. And either way is really fine. I don't think you're a failure for choosing either one.
That's great advice. That is really great advice. Danny, is there anything we left out? Is there anything you wanted to cover that we didn't touch on?
No, I was glad to be able to speak a little bit about my own background, about my research a bit more, and also about the podcast. So I think my producer can be really happy about it.
Yeah, I hope Ido really appreciates that. I think he will. So where all can we find you? It's funny because I asked that question and some people are like, I don't want to be found. Please don't. You're in a pretty public role and with the podcast and everything else. So where all can we find you and your podcast?
So first, the podcast is quite easy. It's called What Are You Going to Do With That? Which is, about the PhD and what people always ask students who are doing a PhD. So you should be able to remember that.
Yeah.
And we're on all social media stuff. So you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And we also have a website, obviously. You can listen to us on Spotify, on Deezer, on Stitcher, on Apple Podcasts, really any major platform you'll be able to find us. And we also happen to have a website where we have the blog. And the blog really has specific tips for ECRs on particular topics. So we talk about the imposter syndrome, which you might have heard about.
Yeah. Yeah, I live it. Yep.
Right? I think we all did. Yeah. So how to deal with that, but also about publishing in a foreign language, where to publish, what to publish, all kinds of things like that. And all of those blogs are actually connected to our YouTube channel, which each has a video of me and some of the people that we collaborated with saying some tips and things about that. So that would be great. You can also find us on YouTube. And then there's just me personally. I think I'm the only one out there with this name. So you can just Google me and then you'll find me. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. And I'll put links to all that in the show notes for this episode. So make it a little bit easier for folks to find you too. But Danny, I really appreciate your thoughts and your openness with all of that. It was a really fascinating conversation, and I can't wait for folks to hear it.
Yes, thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for listening, and y'all keep being cool, and we will talk again soon. Y'all, I hope that in this episode, Danny has encouraged you like she encouraged me to know myself better, to know the things that I love and the things that I want to do, and to keep pursuing those things. And y'all, that's what I'm doing, and it makes me happy that someone else is kind of affirming that that's the way that we should be living our lives. Y'all, I also hope that you can find common ground with people and realize the complexity of human life and the other people that are around us. But I just want to say again, thank you to the Texas Tech Department of Plant and Soil Science for the constant support, for making this whole thing possible and this whole thing able to happen. Thank you for listening. I do this for me, but I also do this mostly for you, because I am glad you enjoy it, and I love to hear your thoughts, and I love to hear your impressions of the show. So thank you for connecting on social media. Thanks for the ratings and reviews that you leave. Y'all know that I love you so much. And thanks for listening. Y'all are awesome. I hope that you keep being cool, and we'll talk to you again next week about trees. Be safe, be good, be smart, and above all, be kind. Take care.